The wind came first, a thin, cutting ribbon of air that slithered through the old spruce and pine, stinging Auri's nose with the sharp scent of resin and the cold, metallic edge of deep winter. She froze mid-step, her wide furred paws pressing into the powdery snow, so light it barely whispered under her weight. Her ears pivoted toward the direction of the gust, her whiskers trembling, her amber eyes narrowing against the brightness of the snow-reflected sun. The smell was faint, scattered by distance and years, but she would have known it anywhere. It was home. For days she had been moving across a patchwork of ridges and valleys, following no set trail, just instinct, hunger, and the rhythm of the land. The snow was deep this year, even in the low valleys, forcing her to use every ounce of her winter-born skill. She had hunted lean, a hare here, a ptarmigan there. The rest of the time she traveled, slipping from shadow to shadow, keeping to the shelter of low branches, or hugging the lee side of rocky outcrops to break the wind. But now the scent, that ghost of familiarity, had found her. It was more than the smell of a place. It was a memory given shape in the air, a blend of resin, ice, and the faint musk of the creeks and stones she had once marked as her own. She stood on the crest of a ridge, the kind of high, narrow spine where the wind could comb through every hair of her thick winter coat. Ahead, the granite horn rose, a weather-worn outcrop that bent the tree line back and forced the wind to swirl in strange, spiraling currents. Beyond it lay a basin stitched together by ribbons of black spruce and open muskeg, its heart split by a half-frozen creek. She could see where the snow piled in smooth drifts along its banks, broken here and there by dark, slick openings where the current still ran fast enough to keep the ice from sealing. Her eyes traced the land in silence, mapping it as she always did before she entered new territory, or in this case, old territory made strange. Every bend of the creek, every stand of trees, every rise and hollow was a memory waiting to be woken. She could picture the dead birch that had fallen across the creek seasons ago, forming a bridge she had used in her younger days. She remembered the open meadow beyond it, where hares would emerge in the soft dusk to feed. But this was no nostalgic journey. She had left this place not because she wanted to, but because she'd been forced out. Years ago, a brutal confrontation with a stronger lynx had left her limping and bloodied, her control of the territory shattered. She had retreated far to the north, into rougher land where prey was scarce but challenges were fewer. She had survived, healed, and grown harder, but she had never forgotten the taste of the air here, nor the pull of the land she once ruled. And now she was back. She moved down the slope with deliberate care, her paws spreading slightly with each step to keep her weight light and silent. The snow here was powder over ice, treacherous if rushed. The spruce closed in around her, the heavy lower branches sagging under the weight of weeks' worth of snow. They brushed against her shoulders, dusting her with cold. The creek came into view, a dark ribbon in the white. She found the fallen birch where she expected it, lying belly down across the narrowest point. The bark had been stripped smooth in places by the passage of countless small claws, not lynx, but hares and squirrels. The air above it was alive with scent. She stopped short. Her own scent was gone, erased. In its place was something sharp, musky, and wrong. Auri lowered her head and inhaled again, testing it against her memory. The odor was layered, fresh over stale, the sign of repeated visits. Not wolf, not another lynx, fox, a big one. It was a scent of ownership, smeared thick across the land like a flag. This was no passing wanderer. This was a resident, the kind that marked and patrolled, the kind that challenged. Her lips curled back in a silent snarl, exposing teeth white as the snow beneath her. She had no love for foxes. They were thieves, scavengers, opportunists. Alone, a fox was no match for her in a fight. But territory was not just about winning battles. It was about the constant pressure, the wear of another predator's presence. And this fox had been here long enough to leave his musk in every trail and crossing. She followed the scent along the bank, weaving between spruce trunks. The fox had crossed the creek at the fallen birch more than once. He had rubbed against a leaning spruce to leave his scent high on the trunk. She paused there, tilting her head, and found something worse. The smell of metal, cold, hard, unnatural. She crouched low, muscles tight, and crept forward. A shallow depression in the snow came into view. The remnants of a fox's sleeping spot, now fouled by something else. The air was tainted with a metallic temp she recognized instantly. A trap. It was buried, but the jaws of steel peeked through the snow like the teeth of some dead, frozen animal. She could smell the faint trace of human hands on it, mixed with oil and the ghost of leather. Her tail lashed once behind her. Humans rarely came deep into the forest in winter without reason. If they were setting traps here, it meant they were hunting for pelts. She circled wide, careful not to touch it. Her kind had no fear of many things, but this she respected. She had seen what it could do to an animal's leg. It was not a predator's kill, quick and clean. It was slow, cruel. Auri sat back on her haunches, breathing slow, watching the trap with cold eyes. Her heart was steady now. Anger could make a predator careless. This was her land, or it had been, and she could not afford carelessness. The wind shifted again, bringing with it a fresh surge of scents. The fox, still distant. The faint musk of hair, buried under the snow. The cold, wet bite of ice over running water. And under it all, the pull of home, the smell of the forest floor beneath the snow, of the birch bark, of the air that lived here and nowhere else. Auri turned her gaze toward the ridge. The granite horn rose above the tree line, its flanks etched with wind-carved snow. From up there, she could see the whole basin, could trace the lines of scent and movement that made up the living map of the territory. She could choose her ground, plan her claim, but she would not do it yet. Not until she had walked every edge of it. Not until she had seen how deep the fox's scent ran. She moved off the trail, vanishing into the shadowed spruce. Snow fell from a branch she brushed, sprinkling her back, melting into cold beads against her fur, before freezing again. The air grew darker under the trees, the day already slipping toward the long winter night. She needed shelter before the temperature dropped further. She found it in the roots of a fallen spruce. Its trunk lifted into the air so the base made a low, arched roof. Snow had drifted against the exposed roots, sealing it into a sheltered hollow. Auri stepped inside, turned twice in the packed snow, and lay down with her head toward the entrance. From here she could see the faint silver light on the creek through the tangle of roots. The wind carried the fox's scent again, fainter now, along with the smell of metal from the trap. Her territory was tainted, claimed by another, and marked by human hands. It did not matter. She had come back to take it. The forest would know her again. And when it did, no fox and no man would stand in her way. The night had been long and thin, stretched tight by the unbroken whisper of wind in the treetops. Auri slept lightly, her ears twitching at the smallest change in sound, the faintest tremor under the snow. By the time the horizon began to pale, not with the warmth of sunlight, but with the cold blue wash of pre-dawn, her eyes were open, fixed on the shadows of spruce roots that framed her shelter. She rose without hurry, stepping into the brittle air, and shook the fine crust of frost from her coat. The world beyond the hollow lay in a muted stillness, broken only by the soft creak of ice shifting in the creek. In winter, silence was never empty. It was layered, and if you listened long enough, it told stories. This morning, it told her the fox had been here again. The scent drifted across the snow in a faint, teasing ribbon, fresher than last night, sharp in the cold air. He had moved along the far bank of the creek while she slept, keeping to the cover of the low spruce. His musk clung to the air like a challenge. Auri stepped out into the open and padded toward the granite horn, moving against the fox's trail. The snow crunched faintly under her weight, the sound swallowed almost instantly by the surrounding stillness. She followed the creek's curve, her gaze flicking from the open water to the places where drifts had settled over its edges, forming treacherous, hollow bridges. The fox's markings were deliberate, placed high on exposed roots, on stumps, on the trunks of young birch where the scent would carry far. He was staking not just the easy ground near the water, but the high ridges as well, the places where a lynx could watch for prey or intruders. She stopped beside one of these marks, a jagged stump, its top sheared flat and polished by years of weather. The fox's scent was thick here, bold. Auri lowered her head, sniffing slowly, her pupils narrowing. She could tell his age in the smell, mature, in his prime, confident. This was not a young, reckless animal. This was a fox who knew how to hold territory. Her tail twitched once, a slow arc, then she stepped forward and rubbed her cheek against the wood, pressing her scent over his. Her glands left behind the deep, musky signature of Lynx, rich and unyielding. It was a message the fox would understand immediately. I am here now. Marking the stump was not enough. She moved along the ridge, choosing a pattern that would cross his trails and overwrite them. She pressed her body against the rough bark of spruce, brushed her flanks along leaning saplings, left her paw prints deep in the snow, where he would have to see them. The sun, weak and pale, climbed just high enough to turn the snow-esque surface into a cold glitter. From her new vantage point on the ridge, Auri could see far down the creek and into the open meadow beyond. It was a place she remembered well, a hunting ground where hares and ptarmigan would feed in the half-light, their movements barely disturbing the snow. It was also where she saw the fox for the first time. He appeared at the meadow's edge, moving with a low, fluid gait, his red coat flaring almost gold in the thin sunlight. His tail was a thick banner behind him, the white tip twitching. Even at this distance, she could see the deliberate way he placed his feet, the confidence in his stride. He did not see her, or if he did, he gave no sign. Auri crouched low, muscles coiled, not to hunt, but to watch. The fox paused at a snow-buried shrub, nosed under the powder, and pulled free the frozen body of a vole. He shook it once, then swallowed it whole. His head came up, and for a heartbeat his eyes scanned the meadow, ears swiveling. Then, as if reminded of some private duty, he walked to a sapling at the meadow's center and lifted his leg. The scent mark was as much a declaration as any roar or growl, or his claws flexed in the snow. She could feel the shape of the coming conflict. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. A territory could not hold to predators who marked it so boldly. One would have to yield. The wind shifted, carrying another scent, older, heavier, laced with oil and leather. The trap from yesterday was not alone. Humans had been deeper into this place than she realized. Their smell lingered on the breeze, drifting from the meadow's far edge, where the snow lay broken and churned by something large. She circled wide, keeping low, her paws placing her weight with the precision of habit. The churned snow resolved into a set of deep, straight tracks, human boots, two sets, one larger than the other, moving side by side. Between them, a drag mark scored the snow, long, narrow, and stained faintly red. The smell told her the rest. Hare, the humans had taken prey from her land. It was not the loss of a single hair that stoked the heat in her chest, but the intrusion itself. They had walked here, in the heart of what was once hers, without fear. Auri turned back toward the ridge, her path skirting the fox's scent marks. The fox was not the only trespasser. The humans were worse, unpredictable, unbound by the silent agreements of the wild. The fox could be challenged, beaten, driven away. Humans could not be dealt with so cleanly. When she reached the shelter of the spruce again, she stopped and looked back at the meadow. The fox was gone, his trail cutting toward the far tree line. The humans' tracks led in the same direction. Whether by chance or design, their paths would cross. She wondered which would yield to the other. Auri climbed higher into the ridge, until the land dropped steeply on the far side. From here, the whole basin lay spread before her, the creek like a black thread through white cloth, the meadow a pale scar, the spruce standing like sentinels against the wind. It was still beautiful, it was still hers in memory, but in truth, it was a taken land, not for long. The ridge was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels almost heavy, as though the air itself were waiting. Auri lay crouched on a broad snow-covered boulder, her belly fur pressed flat against the icy crust, her gaze fixed on the basin below. She could see the fox's trail winding away toward the dark mouth of the spruce forest. She could smell the fading bite of human scent from the meadow, but it wasn't the present she was seeing. The shapes of the land were pulling at her memory, teasing it open like a half-healed wound. She remembered the day she left. It had been deep winter then too, the snow harder and drier than now, the light flatter. She had been young, strong, fast, but reckless in the way that only youth can be. This had been her first true territory, claimed from a fading, old male whose scent marks were weak and scattered. She had moved in with speed, marking every ridge, every crossing, hunting hard to feed herself and keep her strength. The land had answered her claim. The hares were plentiful that year. The creek had kept its drinking holes open through most of the winter. She had grown thick and confident in her rule, and then he had come. She could still smell him if she tried. The musk of a large, dominant lynx, the kind that moved like a shadow between trees and made other predators step aside. He had appeared without warning, his scent marks laid boldly over hers within days. At first, she had answered in kind. She had doubled her patrols, scratched deep into the bark of spruces, sprayed the borders with the sharp, musky signal that said, "This is mine." She had crossed his trail once in the snow, the prints so large and deep they had made her hackles rise. The confrontation came at dusk. She had been hunting a hare near the creek's bend when she smelled him ahead, not on the wind, but so close it felt like the air itself had teeth. He stepped into view between two black spruce, a massive male with shoulders like boulders under his winter coat. His eyes were pale gold, steady and cold. They did not blink. The rules of such a meeting were old and simple. Posture, gauge, decide. Sometimes the smaller or weaker animal would back down, slinking away to avoid injury. But she had been young, fierce, unwilling to yield. They circled each other in the snow, paws silent, muscles tense. The air between them was a taut wire, ready to snap. She had made the first move, a leap, claws extended, aiming to drive him back. It had been a mistake. He met her mid-air with a force like a falling tree. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. They rolled in a blur of fur and snow, claws raking, teeth snapping. She remembered the heat of blood in the cold air, the sting of it in her eyes. His weight was crushing, his strength relentless. In the end, she had been driven down, pinned, his teeth at her throat. He had not killed her. That was not the way of such battles when the loser yielded, but he had left her bleeding in the snow. Her scent and pride scattered like broken twigs. She had fled that night, limping, her right hind leg dragging slightly with each step. The snow closed behind her, erasing her prints as if she had never existed there at all. She had not looked back. For weeks, she had wandered, moving farther north into rough country where the prey was scarce and the wind had a constant knife edge. There had been no easy hunting, no sheltering meadows, only steep ridges, tangled timber, and the endless grind of survival. She had learned to make kills in silence, to take small prey without wasting energy, to vanish into the landscape when wolves passed or when the shadow of an eagle crossed the snow. Those years had honed her. They had stripped away the last softness of youth, replacing it with something colder, harder. She had learned patience, the kind that can hold still for hours in snow until the prey forgets you exist. She had learned not to waste a fight unless victory was certain. Now, standing on the ridge above her old land, she could feel the difference in herself, like a new layer of muscle under her coat. She was not the same Lynx who had been driven out. And yet, the memory of that fight was not gone. It lived in her body, in the faint ache of the old scar along her shoulder, in the way her muscles tightened when she smelled another lynx's scent. She had never forgotten the taste of losing. The fox was not that male. The fox was quick and cunning, but he was no lynx. Still, he was a rival, and rivals brought out the same instinct, to reclaim, to hold, to dominate. But there was something else now. The humans, they did not fight for territory in the same way. They took what they wanted without scent marks, without challenge. They set their traps and left, letting the iron teeth do the killing for them. They were unpredictable, and unpredictability was dangerous. The wind shifted, pulling her back into the present. The fox's trail still curled through the basin, bright and fresh. The humans' tracks were already softening under a thin drift of snow. Auri rose from the boulder and shook herself, sending a spray of frost into the air. The past was a scar, but scars were reminders, not shackles. She had returned to a land that was no longer hers, and she would have to take it piece by piece, ridge by ridge, creek by creek, until it was again. The fox would test her. The humans would threaten her. But she had been exiled once, and she would not be exiled again. She stepped down from the ridge, her paws silent on the snow, her body low and fluid. The forest closed around her, its shadows swallowing her shape. This time, she was ready. The sky over the ridge was bruised with the last traces of daylight, fading into the deep indigo of a winter night. The snow under the trees held the memory of the day's pale sun, glowing faintly in the half-light, while the air sharpened with each passing minute, growing cold enough to make the breath crystallize in mid-air. Auri moved like a shadow between the spruce trunks, her fur thick and silent, her paws placing each step with care. The forest was alive with the small sounds of night, the faint gnawing of a hare beneath the snowpack, the whisper of snow falling from an overloaded branch, the distant call of an owl. But beneath those layers of sound, she sensed something else. The fox was near. His scent clung to the air like smoke, fresh and insistent. He had been moving along the ridge, not hunting, patrolling. She could smell where he had stopped to mark a sapling, where he had brushed his flanks against a leaning birch. He was laying down his claim in a deliberate line, as if stitching the forest into his own map. Auri slowed, her body low, tail level with her spine. Her amber eyes scanned the darkness ahead. The snow caught and reflected the moonlight now, bright enough to make the open spaces between trees glow silver. In one of these spaces, movement flickered. He stepped into view without haste, as though the night belonged to him. The moon painted his fur in shades of rust and gold, each movement smooth, measured. His head was high, ears pricked forward, his thick tail swaying slightly. The fox did not slink like prey or skulk like a thief. He walked with the deliberate confidence of a ruler on his rounds. Auri remained still, watching. She could have stayed hidden, the wind was in her favor, but this was not a hunt. This was something older, a meeting written in the silent lore of predators. She took one step forward. The snow whispered under her weight. The fox stopped mid-stride, his head turning toward her. For a long moment, neither moved. The only sound was the faint hiss of wind through the spruce needles above them. Then he shifted his stance, not lowering himself, but not retreating either. His eyes caught the moonlight, flashing a pale cold amber. He was reading her, just as she was reading him. Auri moved out from the cover of the trees, her paws sinking into the snow with each step. She held her head level with her shoulders, her ears forward, her gaze locked on his. Her body spoke the message without sound. I am here. This is mine. The fox's tail twitched once. He lowered his head slightly, but his body stayed taut, ready. Slowly, he began to circle to his left. Auri mirrored him, her paws placing each step with deliberate precision. The circle they traced in the snow was silent but tense. The air between them stretched tight as a snare. They passed within 3 body lengths of each other, close enough for her to smell the sharp musk of his coat, the faint tang of Vold blood on his breath. He would smell her too, the deep, musky signature of a lynx in full winter strength. For a heartbeat, their gazes locked again, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Auri's muscles coiled, ready to spring if he closed the distance. The fox's stance shifted, not forward, but backward. A slow step, then another. He was not running. He was yielding the space between them, but not conceding the land. With a final glance, he turned and slipped into the darkness beneath the spruce, his body vanishing between the shadows as if the forest had swallowed him whole. Auri stood still, watching the place where he had gone. The snow held his scent, fresh and hot in the cold air. This was no retreat in fear, only a postponement. He would test her again, perhaps sooner than she expected. The moon climbed higher, casting the forest in a cold silver light. Somewhere far off, ice cracked on the creek with a sound like a distant gunshot. Auri stepped forward and marked the place where they had stood, pressing her scent deep into the snow. She traced the fox's path for a short distance, then veered off, leaving her own trail cut boldly across his. This was her first challenge answered, not with claws, but with presence. The real fight would come later. For now, the message was enough. She melted back into the trees, her paws silent once more. The wind shifted, carrying with it not just the fading musk of the fox, but the faint, metallic tang of humans somewhere beyond the ridge. The thought settled in her mind like a dark seed. One rival could be met in the open, the other would be harder to see coming. And winter nights in this land were long. The forest that night felt different. It was not just cold, it was sharp. The kind of cold that scraped at the inside of your nose with each breath, and turned every exhale into a long white ribbon of vapor. The moon was a pale coin hanging low over the treetops, its light washing the world in silver and shadow. Snow covered everything, muffling the land into stillness. But beneath the stillness, there were signs of life, faint, fragile traces that only a hunter's senses could piece together. The tiny stitch marks of a mouse's feet, stitched across the powder before disappearing into a tuft of grass. The clean oval depressions of a hare hopping between spruces, the silent sweep of owl wings overhead, leaving no mark at all. Auri moved through it like she had always belonged here. Her paws were wide, furred to the tips, pressing into the snow without breaking its crust. Her ears swiveled constantly, each flick catching and measuring the smallest sound, a shifting branch, a whisper of wind, the distant crack of ice on the creek. She was hungry. The emptiness in her belly was a dull ache, now, not sharp enough to drive recklessness, but deep enough to make every scent of prey seem richer. Tonight, She had scented hares, and the pull toward them was strong. They were out there, safe in their tunnels under the snowpack, nibbling on twigs and bark, their bodies warm against the frozen ground. She could hear them sometimes, the faint, soft nono that stopped abruptly when they felt a shadow above. Her body wanted to stalk, to pounce, to feed, but another scent slid into her nose, then, colder, harder, wrong. The smell of iron. It came on the wind like a thread of smoke, metallic and dry, cutting through the natural sense of pine and snow. Her pace slowed, every muscle tensed under her fur. She had smelled it before, 2 nights ago, buried in the snow near the fallen birch. It was not the smell of stone or the dull taste of creek water. This was human-made, forged, shaped, meant to catch and hold. The scent grew stronger as she moved downstream. Her paws fell more carefully now, her body low, her head level with her shoulders. The night was utterly still, but under that stillness there was sound, faint and quick, a muffled thumping, irregular and frantic. Auri froze. The sound came again, sharper this time, accompanied by a faint, high-pitched squeal. It was the sound of an animal struggling prey in panic. Every instinct she possessed surged toward it, but her mind sharpened instantly. Prey caught this way could mean danger. She crept closer, keeping to the shadows of low branches. The snow opened into a small drift against the creek bank, and there, half buried in white, a snowshoe hare flailed. One of its hind legs was caught in a steel trap, the iron jaws biting deep into fur and flesh. Blood seeped into the snow beneath it, dark and wet against the pale ground. The hare's eyes were wide, its breath fast and shallow. It kicked and twisted, but the trap held with unyielding force. Each movement sent another puff of snow into the air, mixing with the smell of blood and metal until the whole drift reeked of it. Auri's mouth watered despite herself. This was food, warm, struggling, easy to take. A single leap and she could silence it, end its fear, feed her hunger. But something about the scene pulled her back from that edge. The scent of the hare was tangled with the scent of humans. The trap was their work, not the work of the forest. This was bait, bait for her. She circled the trapped hare, her golden eyes never leaving it. Her paws pressed lightly into the snow, careful to stay outside the half-buried arc where she guessed the human scent was strongest. She could see the trap now, its edges revealed where the hare's struggles had kicked snow away. The steel was dull with frost but still deadly, the teeth interlocked around the hare's slender leg. The hare stilled for a moment, panting hard. Its ears twitched toward her, and its body shivered in a way that was not just from cold. She could feel its fear as clearly as she could smell its blood. Auri stepped closer, not toward the hare's neck, but toward the trap itself. She lowered her head, whiskers brushing the snow, and sniffed. The metallic scent burned in her nose. Beneath it was the faint, sour note of oil, the ghost of human hands. Her ears flattened slightly. She remembered the trap she had found before, how the scent of man had clung to it like rot. These things killed differently than wolves or eagles. They did not chase, they did not bleed the prey quickly. They waited, patient and cruel, until the caught animal either froze or the humans returned. Auri backed away a step. Hunger argued with caution in her chest, a primal tug-of-war. She could end the hare's suffering. She could eat, but if she stepped wrong, the trap could take her leg. A lynx with one good leg did not survive a northern winter. The hare twitched again, a weak kick, and something in her mind shifted. She did not want to leave it for the humans, not alive, not dead at their hands. She moved forward again, her paws slow and deliberate. Her eyes traced the shape of the trap under the snow, remembering its design from the one she had sprung before. She lifted one paw and pressed into the snow just beside the metal plate. The hare squealed and jerked, but she ignored it, testing the pressure points. Her claws unsheathed, she hooked at the edge of the mechanism, careful to keep her pads away from the jaws. The metal was stiff with frost, but her weight was steady, her muscles controlled. She pressed harder, a slow, deliberate push. The trap's spring groaned under the pressure. Then, with a sudden metallic snap, the jaws sprang open. Snow leaped into the air, scattering in a small halo around them. The hare was free. It didn't pause to thank its rescuer. It bolted instantly, limping and bleeding, disappearing into the shadowed spruce. Its tracks were erratic, desperate, a staggered trail that would lead it to some hidden hollow where it might live out the night. Or not. Auri stood over the sprung trap, her breath clouding in the moonlight. She stared at it for a long moment, the metal jaws gaping empty in the snow. She had not touched the plate with her own pads. Her scent would be faint here, diluted by cold. But still, humans would know something had happened. They would return. She bent and rubbed her cheek against the snow a few paces away, leaving her scent in a place the fox might find. A quiet message. I move here freely. I see what you do. Then she turned, her body melting back into the dark. She moved uphill, away from the creek, her paws silent once more. But her mind was turning over what she had just done. The fox was a rival she could see, scent, and challenge. The humans were different. They could appear without warning, leave danger hidden in the snow, and vanish again. They killed without being present. That kind of enemy required a different kind of war. The forest was no longer only a contested territory between predator and predator. It was a board with 3 players now, and one of them did not follow the rules of the wild. Auri's breath steamed in the cold as she moved between the black trunks of the spruce. Behind her, the sprung trap lay like an open wound in the snow, waiting for the hands that had set it to return. And somewhere beyond the ridge, she thought she heard the faint growl of a machine engine, low and steady, cutting through the silence. The humans were still out there, and they were moving. The morning broke, brittle and pale. A thin mist clung low over the creek, curling round the spruce trunks before unraveling in the faint sunlight. The snow glittered with frost so fine it looked like the ground itself was breathing light. Auri moved along the upper ridge, where the wind scoured the snow into ripples and the trees thinned, giving her a long view of the basin below. Her senses were sharpened after the night's encounter with the trap. Every shift in the wind, every stray scent, she measured with deliberate care. The humans were still on her mind, unpredictable, dangerous, but in the cold clarity of dawn, another presence began to press at the edges of her awareness, subtle at first, then sharper. It came not from the ground, but from above. A shadow passed over the snow, quick and soundless. Auri froze, her ears flattening. She knew that shadow, the broad, tapering wings, the long fanned tail. Blaze. Blaze was no ordinary eagle. He was a golden giant of the sky. His wings spanning wider than Auri's body was long. His beak hooked and strong enough to tear through fur and bone. She had seen him before in the far north, once circling over a wolf kill, once stooping to snatch a snowshoe hare clean off the crust of snow. But here, in her reclaimed territory, his presence was an intrusion she had not counted on. The shadow wheeled once, then vanished behind the glare of the morning sun. Auri's muscles tightened. She knew his kind's habits. A high, circling hunt, waiting for the right moment to drop from the sky like a falling star. Even a lynx, heavy and strong, could be vulnerable on open ground, especially if surprised. She scanned the ridge, looking for cover. The nearest spruce was 10 paces away, its lower branches heavy with snow. She began to move toward it, slow but purposeful, keeping her head low. The air shifted. She heard it then, the faint rush, a deepening in the silence. Instinct exploded in her muscles. She spun just as Blaze came in low from the sun's blind side, his talons extended, his body a blur of brown and gold. Auri leaped sideways, snow spraying in an arc. The eagle's talons raked across her flank, catching fur but not flesh. Blaze banked sharply, his wings throwing a gust that rattled the nearby branches. Her heart was pounding now, each breath sharp in the cold air. This was not a casual flyover. This was a hunt. Blaze had seen her and decided she was worth the risk. He climbed again, wheeling higher, his silhouette sharp against the washed-out sky. Auri moved toward the rocks at the edge of the ridge, where a jagged outcrop jutted above a steep drop. The stone was slick with ice, but it offered her both cover and advantage. She crouched low behind it, watching the sky. Blaze circled once, twice, then folded his wings and dove. The sound was like tearing silk, growing louder in an instant. Auri darted forward at the last moment, using the rock's edge to launch herself upward. The two predators met in a flurry of snow and feathers. Auri's forepaw struck out, claws unsheathed, raking across Blaze's wing. The eagle let out a piercing cry, the sound slicing through the still air. His talons snapped shut on empty snow as he pulled up, beating his wings hard to gain height. Auri landed, her paws skidding slightly on the ice. She turned instantly, eyes tracking him as he rose again. Her flank stung where his talons had grazed her. A shallow scrape, but enough to remind her that another pass could be worse. This was no ground fight she could dominate with strength alone. Blaze owned the air, and in the air, speed was king. She needed him to commit fully, to come low enough for her to use her own weapons. She backed toward the cliff edge, deliberately stepping into the open. Her tail lashed once, her body loose but ready. Blaze circled, suspicious, but the lure of exposed prey was strong. He dove again, faster this time, his shadow racing across the snow toward her. At the last moment, Auri dropped flat. Blaze's talons swept over her, catching only air, but his momentum carried him low, too low. Auri surged upward, her muscles driving her into him. Her claws caught his leg, holding for a heartbeat before the force of his wings tore him free. Feathers drifted down like brown snowflakes. Blaze climbed hard, his wing beats uneven now. He circled once more, high enough to be safe, then tilted away, his shape shrinking against the horizon. The challenge was not over. Eagles were patient, but for now, he had yielded the sky above her. Auri stood still, her sides heaving, watching until he was gone. She licked at the scrape on her flank, tasting the faint tang of blood. It was a shallow wound, but it reminded her that the fight for this land was not just against the fox or the humans. Others, too, would see her return as an opportunity to test her strength. The forest was waking now, the light growing clearer. Somewhere down the ridge, she caught the distant bark of the fox. It was short, sharp, almost mocking. Auri narrowed her eyes. One battle at a time. Blaze had tested her from above. The fox would test her on the ground, and the humans, they would test her in ways she had yet to see. She padded toward the thicker trees, leaving the open ridge behind. The snow closed over her tracks almost immediately as the wind picked up. Above, the sky was empty. For now, the storm announced itself in whispers. At first it was nothing more than a restless shiver in the tops of the black spruce, the faint hiss of snow dust lifting from the crust and spiraling lazily into the air. But Auri knew the language of the wind, and this was no idle breath. This was the first warning, the kind that slid along her fur and made her ears twitch. By midday, the sky had sunk lower, the light turning flat and gray. The ridges that in the morning had been clear lines against the horizon now seemed to dissolve into the haze. The air thickened, carrying the sharp metallic chill that always came before the deep storms. Somewhere above the timberline, clouds were massing, dragging their bellies across the peaks. She moved with purpose. Storms like this could erase a landscape in minutes, making even the most familiar ground strange and treacherous. She had already begun angling toward higher ground, where she knew the gnarled roots of a toppled spruce offered a hollow deep enough to cut the wind. It wasn't perfect shelter. Nothing in the open wild was, but she had weathered worse in that place. The wind built as she traveled, pushing against her flanks, carrying with it fine, dry snow that hissed through the undergrowth. The sound of the forest changed, too, less the scattered calls of birds or the small, muffled scurrying beneath the snow, and more the constant, rising voice of the storm itself. Then it came, faint but distinct, a cry. It was not the sharp bark of a fox or the thin, shrill whistle of a hare. This was higher, wavering, breaking mid-note like it was fighting the wind itself. Auri stopped dead, head lifting, ears swiveling, to find the thread of sound amid the growing howl. It came again, fainter, carried on a lull between gusts. She turned toward it without hesitation. The snow was already deep here, piling in soft, deceptive drifts that gave way under her weight. Each bound sent her chest deep, and she had to wrench herself free before leaping again. The wind was at her side now, driving the snow across her path in long white ribbons. The cry grew clearer, still weak, but close enough now that she could feel the urgency prick at her instincts. She crested a low rise, and there in the lee where the wind had piled the snow against the earth, she saw it, a small, huddled form, half buried beneath the drift. A lynx cub. It was no older than half a year, its limbs still too long for its frame, its paws oversized and clumsy. The storm had plastered snow and ice into its fur, clumping it into stiff spikes along its back and ears. Its eyes wide, wild fixed on her, and a thin hiss escaped its throat, though the sound was swallowed almost instantly by the wind. Auri halted just outside the hollow, breath steaming in the narrow space between them. She could smell it now, faint under the cold, the scent of kin, but there was nothing else, no trace of a mother, no recent trail of another lynx. Whatever had happened, the cub was alone. She could leave it, The thought slid into her mind as cleanly as the wind cutting through the trees. Winter was no season for charity. Every extra mouth to feed was a weight, every slowed step a risk. This cub was weak, its body shivering with cold that was already sinking too deep. If she walked away, the storm would finish what it had started. But she didn't walk away. Something in its eyes caught her. Not the fear, but the stubborn spark under it, the part that had kept it alive long enough for her to find it. She thought, unbidden, of another time. Herself, younger, limping from a fight she had lost, the wind erasing her trail behind her. She had known then the bite of cold in the lungs, the hollow ache in the belly, the awareness that she was both predator and prey to the winter. She stepped forward, pushing her shoulders into the drift to widen the hollow. The cub shrank back a fraction, but did not bolt. Perhaps it lacked the strength. Perhaps it recognized that she was not here to kill. When the space was clear enough, Auri lowered herself into it, curling her body so that her flank blocked the wind from reaching the cub. Her fur brushed its side, and she felt the tremors running through it. Small, rapid, unrelenting. The cub's breath came in quick, shallow bursts at first. Then, as minutes passed, it slowed, deepening as the heat from her body seeped into its own. Tentatively, it pressed closer, tucking its head against the thick fur at her side. Outside, the storm hit its full stride. The wind's voice rose into a constant, unbroken roar, rattling the frozen branches until they shed avalanches of snow. Flurries whirled and spun, erasing the world beyond their narrow shelter. The air inside the hollow grew heavy with the mingled warmth of their breath, a small, stubborn pocket of life against the cold. Hours passed. Auri dozed lightly, waking at each subtle change in the wind, her ears angling toward the entrance. The cub slept more heavily, exhaustion and cold dragging it down into deep stillness, broken only by the occasional twitch of its paws as if it dreamed of running. By the time the wind began to lose its teeth, the entrance was half buried by new snow. Auri rose, shaking frost from her whiskers and coat. The cub stirred, blinking up at her with eyes clearer than before. It was still thin, still fragile, but it stood when she stepped toward the drifted exit. She pushed her way out into the new world the storm had made. The forest lay buried under a fresh, pristine skin of white. Every old trail was gone, every familiar scent muted. The air was sharp, still carrying the aftertaste of the storm, but the light had softened, the sky clearing to reveal the first dim stars. The cub hesitated at the threshold of the hollow, then followed, stepping into the path she broke. It sank deep into the snow with each step, but it didn't fall behind. Auri paused at the edge of the ridge, her gaze sweeping down toward the basin that was both her goal and her battleground. She flicked her tail lightly against the cub's shoulder. Not command, not comfort, but a signal. Stay close. It did. Together, they began moving toward the sheltering dark of the spruce. Two sets of tracks weaving side by side into the endless winter night. The storm had passed, but its mark, in snow, in silence, in the bond now between them, would remain. The snow from the storm lay untouched, a smooth, unbroken sheet that gleamed under the pale disk of the full moon. Every ridge, every hollow was softened into curves, the world remade in silver and shadow. The forest seemed frozen in place. No wind in the branches, no rustle beneath the snow. Even their breaths sounded too loud in the stillness. Auri moved first, her paws sinking just enough to leave neat, clean impressions in the crust. Behind her, the cub stepped into each print she left, making its own trail invisible. It was learning quickly, not to wander, not to waste steps, not to leave unnecessary sign. They were heading toward the upper creek, where the ice broke in narrow channels, even in deep winter. Fresh water, and perhaps a hair or two at the edges. But Auri's pace was slow, deliberate. The storm had swept the land clean of scents, but now, a day later, the air was once again carrying messages. One of them was fresh, sharp, and unwelcome. Fox, she tasted it on the back of her tongue. The musk of Rufus, thick with confidence. It clung to the snow like a stain, unbroken in places, marking boundaries he clearly thought were his. She had seen his work before, but now the scent was fresher, as if he had passed only hours earlier. Her ears angled back slightly, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the trees ahead. The moonlight reached deep into the forest tonight, its silver fingers slipping between trunks and painting long dark shadows, perfect for hiding, perfect for waiting. The cub slowed behind her, sensing her change in posture. Its small body lowered instinctively, tail drawn close, paws moving quieter. Then Auri heard it, a faint compression of snow, the kind of sound no falling branch could make. She stopped, every muscle going still, her gaze sweeping the shadows without locking on any one place. The cub froze in place behind her. The air was cold and clean, but the fox's scent was close now, close enough that she could feel the hair along her spine rise. From between two spruces, a shape slid into the moonlight. Rufus. His fur was sleek, brushed by moonlight into shades of deep copper and pale cream. His head was low, eyes locked on her, the amber in them catching and holding the light like molten metal. His tail, thick and heavy, swayed slowly behind him, not in relaxation, but in focus. Auri stepped forward, placing herself fully between him and the cub. Her stance was low, weight-centered, the muscles in her shoulders tightening. She had no intention of retreating. Rufus stopped just beyond her reach, the two of them holding each other in the cold, brittle silence. His breath steamed faintly, rising in short bursts. Then, without warning, he moved. It was not a straight charge. He slipped sideways first, quick as a darting shadow, circling to test her reaction. She pivoted smoothly, keeping her body square to his, denying him any angle toward the cub. His eyes flickered once toward the log where the cub hid in the storm, and she understood. He wasn't here for her alone. He feinted left, then came in low on the right. Snow burst around them as their bodies collided, the impact sending a sharp crack of sound through the still air. Teeth snapped, claws raked. Rufus was fast, far faster than a lynx of her size, and he used that speed to dart in and out, testing, probing, looking for weakness. But Auri had fought worse. When he tried to slip past her flank, she pivoted hard, her forepaw striking out, claws catching his shoulder. He yelped, a sharp, angry sound, and spun away, but not far. His tail lashed once, his body gathering again, and then he did what she had been expecting. He lunged not for her, but for the cub. She moved before the thought had even finished forming. Her roar tore the stillness apart, raw and sharp, the kind of sound that froze prey in its tracks. She slammed into him broadside, driving him off course, her weight pinning him into the snow. For a heartbeat they were a single knot of fur, muscle, and fury, rolling through the moonlit powder. Rufus kicked free, twisting to his feet, his sides heaved, his breath coming in visible bursts. There was blood on his shoulder now, dark against the red of his fur. His eyes met hers again, and this time there was no feint, no disguise, just the hard, measuring stare of a rival forced to reassess. He stepped back once, then again, tail flicking. Without a sound, he turned and slipped into the shadows between the spruces. The moonlight caught him one last time before the forest swallowed him. Auri stood still, her breath fogging in the cold air, ears tuned to every sound until the last trace of his scent began to fade. Only then did she turn to the cub. It was crouched low in the snow, eyes wide but uninjured. She stepped close, brushing her flank against it briefly, then moved on toward the deeper forest. The cub followed instantly, close enough that its whiskers brushed her hind leg. The moonlit forest closed around them. The fight was over, but not finished. Rufus would come again, and next time, she suspected, he wouldn't come alone. Morning came thin and pale, the light spreading across the fresh snow like a layer of cold silk. The forest seemed half asleep, wrapped in the hush that follows a heavy storm. But Auri had been awake for hours, her ears tuned to the faintest thread of sound. The wind carried familiar scents, resin from the spruce, the old, fading musk of a snowshoe hare, and one she had learned to recognize instantly. Rufus, the fox's scent was strong, fresh, laid down just hours ago. It was not scattered as before, but concentrated into a single deliberate trail. It wasn't a hunting path. This was the measured pace of a patrol, the kind an animal walks when it believes the ground belongs to it. Auri signaled the cub to stop. The young lynx ducked behind the leaning trunk of a birch, its small body tense. Auri lowered herself and moved like smoke along the forest's edge, until the ground sloped away beneath her paws. There, on the south-facing bank, she saw it, a den tucked beneath the thick roots of an ancient tree, its entrance rimmed with delicate frost whiskers. Warm air breathed from within. Alongside the musk of Rufus was another smell, faint but unmistakable: milk. Fox cubs. She didn't have time to think further before he appeared. Rufus emerged from the tree line, his red coat gleaming in the cold light. His eyes met hers, and in that instant, they both knew this was no chance encounter. They began to circle, each step measured. Auri kept the den at her flank, rather than her back, ensuring she could see it without turning. Rufus saw the tactic, and the muscles under his coat tightened before he lunged. His first strike was fast, a low slash toward her front legs. She twisted, answering with a sharp forepaw swipe that raked his shoulder. He stumbled back a step, but recovered instantly, diving in lower, aiming to knock her off balance. Snow flew in sharp bursts as their bodies collided, teeth snapping, claws catching fur. This was no posturing exchange. This was a fight to set boundaries. Then they broke apart, both panting. And in that breath of stillness, Auri heard it. A sound she now knew too well. The deep, mechanical growl of a machine. It came from down along the creek, accompanied by the bittersweet stench of exhaust, the cold temps of steel, and the warm animal-edged scent of humans. Voices carried upward, chopped by the wind. Rufus heard it too. His ears flicked toward the sound, then back to the den. The look in his eyes was enough. Whatever else he was also a father. Auri felt the choice land in her like a stone dropped into deep water. She could kill him now. One clean strike to the neck, and it would be done. No more rival stalking her, no threat to the cub at her side. But she saw the other outcome as clearly. The snow stained with fresh blood, the iron tang drawing human attention like a beacon. They'd follow the scent straight here, search the area, and when they found the den, they would take every living thing inside. The machine's growl deepened, its rhythm growing nearer. A pale beam from a headlamp began sweeping the lower trunks. Rufus crouched, braced for her attack. Instead, Auri shifted tactics. She lunged sideways, slamming her shoulder into his ribs and shoving him downslope. He twisted, startled, expecting a killing bite, and finding only snow. She pressed the attack again, not striking to wound, but to drive him. Step by step, farther from the den's warmth. He struck back in surprise, but she yielded just enough space to lure him into deeper shadow. Then she let out a low, guttural sound, not a threat but a warning. Rufus paused, chest heaving, eyes narrowing. For a heartbeat, something in his gaze changed. Without a word, he turned and vanished into the trees in the opposite direction from the oncoming noise. Auri returned to the leaning birch where her cub was hidden. She touched her tail lightly to its shoulder, a silent signal, then led it into a narrow game trail that curved around the hillside. They stopped behind a screen of fallen branches, hidden from the open view below. It wasn't long before the humans appeared, two of them bundled in heavy coats, hoods trimmed with fur, gloves thick and clumsy looking. One laughed, the sound sharp in the cold. They laid out a canvas bundle, unrolled it, and pulled free gleaming steel traps. The snap of one locking into place sent a shiver through the cub beside her, but they didn't find the den. No blood, no noise, nothing to draw them to the right place. They searched for a while, then moved on, heading upstream, their machine growling after them until the sound thinned and faded entirely. Only then did Auri move. She took the cub along a higher ridge, the wind now in their favor, erasing what little scent they left behind. At the crest, she paused, looking toward the deeper forest where Rufus had disappeared. Her eyes held not just wariness, but something quieter, a recognition that yesterday's enemy could be today's uneasy ally when a greater predator stalked them both. Then she turned, the cub keeping pace beside her, their twin tracks stitching the snow in silent parallel. Above them, the sky had dimmed again, heavy with the promise of more snow. But this time, Auri knew. When the next storm came, she would not face it alone. Dawn did not so much arrive as loosen itself from the night. The sky went from iron to ice blue, barely bright enough to carve the spruce into darker shapes, barely warm enough to lift a whisper of mist off the creek, where black water stitched through white. Auri rose from the shallow bowl she'd scraped beneath a wind-fallen trunk and let the cold comb her fur clean. Beside her, the cub uncurled, blinking, its breath puffing in small silver ghosts that vanished as soon as they were born. The basin had learned her again. It showed it in small things. The careful hush that settled when her paws touched the snow, the way hares delayed their first bold hops at the meadow's edge. The fox's paths bent a fraction wide of certain stumps she had marked. Even the wind seemed to recognize her, carrying her scent along the seam of the creek and up the ridge, as if reminding the trees what name to keep. They moved before the sun crested the granite horn. The crust took their weight with a dry, faint squeak. Each step left a clean oval print the cub fitted itself into with almost comical precision. Hunger shaped their morning. At a low alder, where the snow domed strangely, Auri paused, listened for the soft, fibrous chew beneath, then punched through. The tunnel collapsed. A hair burst upward like a white spring and met her jaws in a single, final beat of motion. She set the warm weight down, stepped aside. The cub gulped and sneezed fur and gulped again, learning with its tongue what winter required and allowed. When it finished, Auri ate what remained with tidy economy, leaving nothing that would shout her presence when the wind turned. The climb to the horn was a lesson, as most climbs are. Drifts gathered where the ridge hooked the wind. Rock showed through where scouring had polished it like old bone. At the crown, the world unrolled. The creek drew its black, sinuous line and exhaled a faint curl of steam into air, so cold it made truth out of breath. The meadow lay pale, stitched with delicate paragraphs of hoof and paw. The spruce set their shoulders in a dark wall, the needle-tops hissing where the morning breeze threaded them. Auri stood where she had stood when she chose to return, only now the standing had a different weight. The cub pressed to her hock and looked where she looked, the leaning birch flaking like old paper. The south bank where frost made lace at a small dark mouth. The run of shadow where Blaze's wide wings sometimes crossed the snow like a thought, as if conjured. A lone shadow did pass broad, unhurried. Blaze tilted one wing, read whatever the air was writing, and slid away toward the farther ridge. No stoop, no test. Air had its sovereign, and ground had its queen. And for this hour at least, the treaty held. They descended the long way, because duty takes the long way. Auri set her cheek to the trunks that carried scent far, and pressed until resin and musk braided there. She scored the bark shallow where it would weep slow and keep her mark. She chose neither swagger nor stealth, only the calm arithmetic of presence. The cub followed in that same measured tempo, pausing when she paused, learning where wind spills scent like water and where it pools. On a slope scoured thin, a wrong shadow lay under the snow. Too straight, too patient. The cub nosed toward it, whiskers forward. Auri moved a half-step and set a sheathed claw, not on the mouth but on the hidden lever. The trap snapped on air with a flat, final clack that seemed to land on the ribs. The cub jolted, fur-puffed eyes round. Auri let silence finish the lesson. Some mouths do not smell like mouths. Some teeth do not hunt. You live by reading shadows as carefully as you read scent. Midday brought a glassy light that made everything look edged and bright, the kind of light that could convince a creature spring was one good hour away. It wasn't. The cold held, but rumors ran anyway. A darker strip where the sun licked south-facing stone. A new drip forming and reforming under a hanging root. The smallest itch in birch buds, if you knew how to taste it. Men came in the afternoon. You could feel them before you heard the machine. The forest's attention shifts when straight lines enter it. Auri took the cub into the wind Esli, and let the crick S-breath unravel them. Through a curtain of witchy spruce twigs, she watched two figures clamber off a sled. Stomp, speak in their chopped, warm syllables. One unrolled canvas, woke iron. The other pointed guessed, doubted, guessed again. They set their patient mouths in places where the snow wore the right shape. They read a track and misread a story. They left with their certainty only slightly dented. The machine sulked and then obeyed. Noise thinned and slipped among trunks until it was nothing but a suggestion the ear kept searching for out of habit. Only when the quiet had settled properly did Auri angle toward the den bank. Frost still dressed the entrance. Warm breath still lifted it. Rufus stood in the half-light under the leaning spruce with his fur slightly raised, not in challenge, not in fear, but in the old electricity that comes when two hunters share a boundary with teeth and wisdom instead of iron. He turned his head when she pressed her cheek to the bark and left what needed leaving. The scent there was a braid, resin, fox, lynx, frost, not conquest, covenant. You hold, I hold. We do not call the straight-line storms down on this mouth. He stepped away at that, a flick of white-tipped tail like punctuation, and the shadows took him. Beneath the bank, life turned in sleep and did not wake, which was the point. Evening blue climbed out of the creek bed and into the trees. The first star burned a clean pinhole above the horn. Auri led the cub to the flat shoulder of a granite slab. that remembered summer and sat. The basin breathed under them. Hares brought their foolish brown edges back a day too early at the meadow's margin. Grouse tunneled and slept under thin roofs of snow. Somewhere far, Blaze wrote a quiet, moving line no one would read unless they happened to be looking up at the right second. The cub, full-bellied and heavy-lidded, still worked at being a hunter even in rest. A vole rustled beneath the crust at the slab. Besser, little tremor rather than a sound, and the cub felt it the way a string feels a finger. It rose, crouched, counted without numbers, and struck. Snowside, it lifted its head with a tiny life pinched delicately between its teeth, astonished by its own hands. Auri did not take the prize or the glory. The cub ended what it had begun and ate, messy, pleased, and something invisible passed between them that needed no noise at all. Night finished arriving. Stars multiplied until the sky sounded busy, even though it made no sound. A strip of aurora unrolled so pale it could have been a rumor. Cold settled into its proper corners. Auri stood and pressed her face to the air like you pressed your face to a window you haven't looked through in a long time. Home came back on her tongue, spruced resin and running stone and old snow, and her own musk layered everywhere it should be. Not a possession, not a victory parade, not a crown. A sum. The answer to the problem you keep working until the numbers finally agree. She descended with the cub at her shoulder, not tucked. On the way to the night's shelter, she took one last line across the creek seam, and up the cut of the ridge, not because she had to, but because queens walked their edges at day's end. The forest did not bow, it never would, but it made room clear, exact, the size of a lynx and her young, moving with the quiet assurance of creatures who belong, because they have done the work belonging asks. Under the wind-fallen spruce, Auri turned twice and folded herself down, the cub tucking into the hollow, shaped by her ribs and forelegs. The cold came to the doorway and peered in and moved on. Somewhere far off, iron sighed as it cooled. Somewhere very near, water traveled its black corridor under ice and did not stop. When sleep reached up for her, she let it take only part. Queens do not sleep the way stones sleep. They sleep the way snow sleeps, present, listening, ready to knit shut whatever line the night might cut. And in that listening, with the cub's breath ticking like a small metronome against her chest, Auri held her land the way good rulers hold anything, without fists, without fear, with the patient, daily grammar of being there.